Rick Grafmeyer and I go back quite a few years. Rick is an alum of Walsh University. I hired Rick when I was looking for an attorney to add to my tax department, and I wanted somebody that could learn and speak the language of the pension law, because at that time we were having ERISA come into play, and I needed somebody to work with me and work with our client, and needed some pension experience. And so I hired Rick to be that legal person that had the idea of really knew how to research, do tax research. But I also knew, he said, one thing I'll tell you, even though I'm an accountant, I do not do numbers. I says, Rick, this is an accounting firm. But anyways, I learned that. He's a very valuable friend, and he was a very valuable resource from the pension law and a outstanding staffer that I had at Ernst & Young. He left me and went to work for MCI as a lobbyist. And from his experience being a lobbyist, he met a lot of congressional people in that role. Since 2003, Rick has been a partner at Capital Tax Partners, a tax legislative and regulatory law firm in D.C. He formerly served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Joint Committee on Taxation from 1998 through 2000, where he was responsible for legislation and technical studies, including study of corporate tax shelters, a major 3-volume tax simplification project, a comprehensive study of the penalty and interest system, and 2 studies on disclosures impacting tax-exempt organizations. In addition to his government service, Rick has been a partner in Arthur Anderson's National Office for Federal Tax Services, as well as the National Director for Washington Tax Services for Ernst & Young in the National Tax Office. Rick is widely known as an expert on Senate and House parliamentary procedures, rules, as well as budget process rules. Rick earned his BA degree in accounting from Walsh University, a JD degree from the University of Akron School of Law, and an LLM degree from Georgetown University Law Center. It's my proud pleasure to my friend, Rick Grafmeyer.
All right. Okay, Ron, I have one question. Oh, here's my little clicker. All right, so for those of you who have heard me talk before, we're rapid fire. We got a lot to cover. There's things like elections going on and stuff. And so we're going to go through them as fast as we can and cover as much ground as we can. I thought to myself, who in their mind wants to come here and talk on politics and taxes? You're guaranteed to leave this room depressed. Guaranteed. And so, but I've taken on the job, so I'll try to make it a little humorous as well as insightful and knowing what we're doing here. I made little notes to myself, so I'm going to have to put these on because you never know. First thing, let's start. I'm not going to predict what's going to happen in 2014. You know, it makes no sense. You'll remember what I said. Now, we'll talk about 16 later because you won't remember. But let's talk about what you're going to see on TV in the next week. You really want to watch, because you'll all at least be able to stay up this long, to see what happens in New Hampshire, North Carolina, Georgia, and Iowa. Those are your big states to watch. They should have results all through by about 11 p.m., because those are mostly all Eastern time zones except for Iowa. You'll know if there's a GOP wave, even as early as New Hampshire reporting, but you'll have a good feel where this election is going just from those 4 states. Now, I have to say there's numerous scenarios, and you've all starting to hear this on TV. I gave a speech a week ago with Charlie Cook, who's the NBC political, and I've known Charlie for years, and we were talking about all this stuff, and he was kidding me. You may not know by Wednesday morning how the elections went, because you're going to likely have Louisiana and Georgia go to a runoff. Because in those states, you got to get 50% of the vote, or else you don't win, because you have libertarian candidates and other candidates who are getting anywhere from 3 to 7%, and so no one gets over 50. So they're going to have to go to runoffs. One runoff's in December 6th. The other one's not till January 6th, the day after Congress is supposed to start back up in session. Plus, we're going to talk a lot about lame ducks. And then you got Kansas, because they have an independent guy who may win. He's an independent, and he said he's going to caucus with who's ever in the majority, but no one believes him because it's politics. And so you'll not know what he's going to do till maybe January himself, because if Louisiana and Georgia are going to runoffs, and he says he's going to caucus with the majority party, you got 3 seats that are up in the air. So that's a problem. So I'm just telling you, we may not know. And then what I was going to go back to, Charlie Cook said something I hadn't thought about, but this is a reality. In our age of computers and everything else, when you vote up in Alaska, in many places in Alaska, especially in Eskimo reservations and stuff, they literally vote on paper ballots, put them in a mailbag, and put them on a dog sled. Honest to God, that's how they get there. And so they will be traveling by dog sled. So you may not know for about 3 days what the votes are if that Alaska vote's close, and they think it is going to be close. So, I mean, we're still carrying ballots by dog sled. It just blew my mind. So anyways, so he said, even that, if that race is close, that's a 4th state that's in play. Now, you hear a lot about what commentators say of toss-up states. You hear this thrown out all the time. And normally a toss-up state, you get the name from a coin toss. It's close enough, either party could win. But let me just tell you a reality of politics. It never works that way. In the last 10 to 12 years, if you look at all the toss-up races, they always go 80 to 90% to one party. So when they talk, but you don't ever think about it because you guys have real lives and real jobs. But if you actually followed politics a little bit, you would actually know that toss-up states, while they're toss-up races, they don't actually fall that way. Believe it or not, all politics is nationalized, even though you try to make it local. And so there are trends. And so when you look at toss-up states, what you find out is it's between 80 and 90% go to one party. So we're going to see if this year holds the same truism that it's held since even before 2004, because that's how it's been. It's been in the 80, 85% range for toss-up. So we're going to wait and see. To let you know how even the political parties think this race is going to continue on to the runoffs, the Democrats have already bought TV time equal to $2.1 million in Louisiana, and Republicans have already bought TV ads for $10.5 million of ads to run in December. So I mean, both political parties are investing already big time, assuming there's going to be a runoff in Louisiana. That's a given. And they're starting to put away money to invest in Georgia, too. So I throw that. So we're gonna try to hit some of these things and talk about some of this stuff. Let's see here if I want to talk about it. Let's move. Okay, politics of this. Let's go to this. I don't want to get too political because I wanted to talk, believe it or not, a little bit about tax. Why are we in a gridlock? I actually had breakfast with someone this morning, and it's sort of like, Rick, why does no one ever do anything there? And what do you do if no one's doing anything? And so I have to explain that one. But anyways, the bottom line is there is a lot of gridlock, and you have to say why. And it doesn't happen accidentally. There are reasons, and what I have for you here is some of the reasons. First, since 1980, control of the Senate continually flip-flopped 6 different times. And here's some other things. Of the 54 Democratic senators, 32 have never been in the minority. Now, why does that matter? Rick, I say to myself, when you're in the minority, you're dirt on my shoes, as far as I'm concerned when I'm in the majority. I treat you like nothing. You get, and especially in the House, and when you're in the majority, you get like 75% of the congressional budget, to spend on staff and things. When you're in the minority, you get 25. So right off the bat, you're outmanned. In the Senate, it doesn't quite work that way, but it's a little closer. But anyways, so when you're in the minority, you don't control what legislation is brought up. You don't control what hearings get asked. In the Senate, for instance, the Senate Finance Committee, the tax writing committee that I worked with for a lot of years, when you're in the minority, you get to pick one witness out per hearing, one. Everybody else gets to pick out, the majority gets to pick out 10 or whatever you want. You get to pick one witness. And so if you've never been in the minority, guess what? You don't know how to treat the guy who's in the minority because you've never been there. So if you've never been in the morning, you don't know how miserable it is. And so that's a problem because you've never experienced it before. So that's a problem that most of these people have never been in the minority. The other problem is most of these senators, especially because that's where one of the big problems is, you see on the next slide, 46 of them have been there less than 6 years. Now, why is that a problem? If you recall, years ago we talked about term limits. We got to get these guys out of here. We got to get new blood and stuff. Well, the problem with new blood is this. If I know you're only going to be around for one term, 6 years, I don't treat you as nice. But if you were Senator Rockefeller, who's going to be around 30 years, if I tick you off, guess what? I got to live with you for 30 years. Okay? And so, believe it or not, I'm trying to get you in heads. Members think this way. And so, if you know this guy's not going to be around in 2 years or 4 years because he's already said, I'm only going to stay for 2 or 4 years, guess what? I don't have to be as nice to you because I don't have to deal with you that long. And so, believe it or not, I mean, this all seems childish. Everything I'm going to talk to you about, it's going to seem like you're back in high school again. But that's sort of how it works, and it's a microcosm of America. And that's what Congress is supposed to be, and that's sort of how it works. So that's a problem, that they haven't been around long enough. Also, 52 senators have House experience. Everything I've just said is magnified in the House because they have elections every 2 years. So there's turnover going on all the time. And I mean, when I say turnover, it's misery in the House the day after the election. Do you know you have to be out of your offices by, like, if you're a member who got defeated, you got to be out of your office by, like, December 10th. So you got to pack up everything and everything else. Then they move you to some temporary office because, you know, we're going to have a lame duck here. We're going to be in session for a month or two. They move you to some space in the basement where you have one phone for not only the member, but for 15 of us staff. You get one phone and stuff. And so, you know, it's sort of miserable. And so the fact that, and this is the House, Senate's not quite so bad. But so the fact that most of these senators, the majority of the senators have House experience, they bring what they've learned. And so they come over to the Senate and they act like they did in the House, not knowing that the Senate is a little different. They do try to get along a little better. They have longer terms. It's there for a reason. Actually, people who wrote the Constitution actually made some sense. And so it's supposed to work that way. So I just throw that out to you for what it's worth. Let's see here. Let's move on because I got a lot of different little reasons why we have gridlock. All right. Have we had gridlock? Absolutely we have. If you look at how many enacted items got enacted so far this year, look at the trend. Miserable trend. Now, and when you see 163 items enacted, that includes naming a post office, that includes naming a road, you know, so don't think that's 163 items of real legislation. So, you know, they passed that, but in other years, you know, they've done either they named a lot of post offices or they actually were doing things. Okay, so you have that there. But the House did pass 350 items, sent them to the Senate, never went anywhere. Because I'm talking enacted laws in that prior slide. Now, to make sure I'm not talking partisan here, because I'm not, the last time we had this kind of problems where they hardly passed anything was in 81, 82. And when was that? When the Senate and the Oval Office were in GOP hands. So it's not partisan. This is how it works. And so the last time we were that way is when the GOP had it in 81, 82. Now, another reason, and I was saying this at one of the folks earlier at the thing, positive ads. You look at the trend. Positive ads are going down. Positive ad is not an ad where you say, I like puppies. A positive ad just says, I stand for this, I'm for this, you know, this is who I am, this is my background. That's deemed to be a positive ad. A negative ad is this person's scum, you know, this person did this, he's a criminal, you know, whatever the case may be. Those are negative ads. And if you look, in almost all the contested states, more than 50% of the ads are negative. Now, you would normally say, well, you know, why do they run these? We all hate these negative ads. You may all hate them, but guess what? They work. They clearly show they change voters' minds. So that's why you get them. But if you're a member, now let's think about why we have gridlock. Go back to my topic. Why do we have gridlock? If you're a member and my pal or my friend is running in another state and someone's running ads saying this guy's a criminal and he's a child beater and whatever else he wants to run ads on, you think if that person gets elected who ran those ads, you think I'm going to go over and say, hey, would you like to do a bill together with me? No, you ran these ads against my friend and said, you know, he's a criminal. I don't want anything to do with you. So these negative ads actually follow through into Congress. And it's one of the reasons why members have a tough time working together. Now, this year, among all years, because we've had so many contested races, ads have went over the just crazy. There have been, as of right now, 1 million political ads run during the last 12 months of this year. 1 million political ads. And to give you a feel, I thought this was good. I didn't make this up. Someone else came up with the idea. If you want to get a feel for how many ads that really is, 1 million, it sounds. If you took every episode of Jeopardy from the 1960s forward, you could run every episode twice and not equal the number of time that were spent on political ads. That's going from the 1960s. I mean, it's just a remarkable amount of political ads that have been run this year. So, if you're a newspaper or television station, this is a good year. Let's talk about the other problem. The other problem is, if you look at this chart, and the intent of this chart is where the crossover is, where the lines cross over. So it's right here, I can't reach up there, it's right here. If you look, what this chart's intended to show is the most liberal Republican or the most conservative Democrat. Where do they cross over and how many members fall within that line thing? And when you look at this, there's a lot of crossover in 82, not so much crossover in 97. And then if you look at this, we've got a few members who cross over. Everybody else is way more partisan Republican or way more partisan Democrats. That's how many's left in the middle. And so, and some of it's because of how the census works with House races. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but bottom line is people don't feel compelled from an election standpoint because of the way the districts are put together and other reasons to try to cooperate because they don't have to. The districts are drawn now to protect incumbents, both Democrats and Republicans. And so that's what you get left in. So, the big thing if you look at this chart is 1982 versus 2012. If you look at the difference that's happened in just a few years, it's just remarkable. All right. So I've told you how, what's going to sort of look for in 2014. I'm not making any predictions, but let me tell you what members focus on. They're already looking at 16 and 18. And you're starting to see some, if you listen to listen to your political reporting on Tuesday when the election goes on, they're going to start talking about this. 16. If you think 14's an issue, 16, all the 2010 GOP seats that they won during the wave of 2010, they come up in 2016. And if you look in the Senate, for example, there's a lot of seats that come up in GOP states that Obama won. And then you look at people like Grassley and McCain, who are going to be in their 80s. You have very few Democratic seats that are going to be in play. So the best guess, GOP loses 4 to 5 seats in 2016. Best guess. And likely it's going to be heavier than that. So that's why you hear people talk now that they need to win as many seats as they can, because if the GOP in the Senate only comes up to, let's say, 52-48 or something, it's pretty well guaranteed they're going to lose that Senate in 2016. But then, look at 2018. It's just crazy how this has worked. It didn't always work this way, but in these last couple elections, worked the way. In 2018, just the opposite. There's probably 7 to 9 toss-up seats, and only 2 of those are going to be GOP seats, so the Senate could flip again in 2018. And so we're talking about flip-flopping all the time. Now, if you were a member, what would be the first thing you think about? Wow, I'm only in for 2 years. Maybe I need to do something. Because I'm only going to be here 2 years in the majority. I mean, that's the general thought. Now, that's what you all may think, not necessarily what they would think. But we're going to have to wait and see. But all I say is when I look at this, and this is what members are looking at, they know this so well, that the Senate especially could flip-flop back and forth. I don't care who's in the president's. I don't care who's in the president's office. It's going to flip back and forth. It's just the nature of how this has been put together over the last couple elections. And so it's going to drive what we do in town. And so it's either going to become partisan, really partisan, way more than we've seen it before, or they're actually going to try to work to get something done, because you're only going to be in the majority 2 years. Then the Democrats will be in majority. Then the Republicans will be in majority. So, and it's just the nature of what seats come up and stuff. So you would think they would try to do something. So we'll wait and see how that goes. Let's talk about what we got coming up here. So the couple dates I didn't put up on the slide, but lame duck refers to when they come back after the election and before January 1. And they don't always come back, and generally the history is when they do come back, they never do anything. But this year, we got a lot of stuff to do because they punted the ball on so much during the year. They punted a lot to the lame duck because everyone wanted to see how the election went. Now, the problem with that is, are they going to do anything after the election, especially if the Senate's going to flip? So let me give you some dates that are sort of interesting, and then we'll talk about some of these issues. November 12th, Congress comes back into session officially. But most of that's for the new members, to meet other members, to try to, get their office space, to figure out hiring staff, It's all a lot of administrative stuff. There may be some stuff that goes on in the Senate, but nothing that matters. Maybe a nomination or two, but in my eyes, nothing that matters. So they're in November 12th. They're likely going to go out around 18th or something like that of November. Okay, that's the plan. December 6th is the Louisiana runoff. And if the Senate's still in play, that will matter. Then in December, they come back again in the first week of December. And because the runoff's on December 6th, that first week of December, the House may do some things, some of these items on here, but the Senate's not going to do any of them because they don't want to make Mary Landrieu vote on anything. So they're not going to do any of this stuff in the Senate. So that means the Senate isn't going to do nothing in the first week that matters, and the House will probably pass one or two of these items, and we'll talk about them in a second. Then the schedule is that the House could leave as early as December 12th. Now, realistically, they're probably going to stay in until the 17th, but right now they're saying they're going to leave on the 12th. Well, if they actually would leave on the 12th, that would give you 1 week where the Senate and the House are both in. Man, I don't know how you get stuff done in 1 week, and I couldn't get it done for 12 months, but I guess you could get it done in 1 week. And so that's what the problem is date-wise, but the House will surely leave and the Senate will surely leave around December 17th. One of the reasons why, John Boehner's sick and tired of missing his Christmas vacation with his family, and he's vowed he's getting home for Christmas. Because, I've been there several times where we worked right up to Christmas Eve and worked on New Year's Eve. And, I can remember being in the White House on New Year's Eve. And so, they've done that. And he's basically said, I've had it with working through the holidays. I'm getting home. We're out of here. And he's pretty adamant about it. So I do think they're going to be done. But what do they get done? And then it goes, don't forget, I told you, Georgia's runoff is January 6th. So you got that problem. And the Congress is supposed to start up again January 5th. And then you got to do everything else I said. There's office space moving. You got to figure, once you're in the majority, then you got to figure out all the budgets. And, then you got to figure out office space, and people are moving. And, believe it or not, it's hard to get work done then. So all that's going to go. I thought it was interesting. These items on this list here are broken down between, and I thought, again, not my idea, but someone came up with this. I thought it was cute. Must pass and will pass. Must pass, but maybe not. Ought to pass, but maybe not. And maybe. And so you got a must and a will, a must but a but, an ought to but a but, and a maybe. And if that's sort of how you break these down. I thought it was a cute way to do it because that's sort of how Congress looks at these things. So the CR and the omnibus, that all refers to all the spending bills. All the spending that Congress does expires on December 11th. Okay? And so they have to do something by December 11th. Now, they could pass a 1-week bill if they decide to stay until the 17th. They could pass a 1-week bill while they're doing it. And you're going to see all kind of crazy stuff. Who knows? I don't even want to guess on that. But they have to do something on spending. They could do a short-term spending bill that takes them to March or June. They could do a longer-term spending bill that takes them to the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. This all gets into, well, do we want to try to change the spending priorities, or we want to keep going on with the Democratic spending plan since they held the Senate all this time? who knows? But that's the kind of stuff that's going to go on. Tax extenders are a big deal. This all matters to you all because it's going to affect your tax returns. It may not affect your personal tax return, but it affects the IRS processing your tax returns. Because there are about 50 some items, and we'll get to it later in the speech, that have to pass because they've either expired, if you can imagine this, back in 2013, or they're going to expire in 2014 here. So they need to do something. And some of this stuff is stuff you want to do. It's tax deductions for teacher supplies. And, there's a lot of, warm and fuzzy stuff you want to pass here. The big one that needs to pass, though, is a state local sales tax deduction. There's 7 states in this country that don't have an income tax, but they have high sales taxes. Texas being one, Tennessee another, Nevada, there's a variety of people. Well, they get a special deduction then for their sales taxes they pay. Well, that expires. And let me tell you, the members from those states want to make sure that happens. And then that gets back into law. So there's going to be a lot of pressure to do this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Internet tax freedom and marketplace fairness refers it to, right now, states cannot tax your internet access. Okay, so based on what you're doing for your internet, they can't tax it. There are a few states that they're allowed to do some small things, but generally they can't. That expires also on December 11th. Something has to be done. Now, why do I think for sure something's going to get done on that? It's because the phone companies and the cable companies have told the members that if you don't pass this, we're going to put stuffers in our bill, on our bills that we send to customers, blaming you for not passing this and saying how everyone's internet costs are going to go up because you didn't do anything. Members are going to do something because they don't want to see those stuffers. Now, it's like anything else, and we've talked about this in other speeches. It's poker. Do I really think all the cable companies and phone companies are going to put those stuffers in their bills? I don't. Could some? I think they will. And so if you're a member, you're trying to figure out, what about my phone company and my, cable company and communication company? So that's why they're going to do something. TRIA, it's a small thing, terrorism risk insurance, where you can't operate, because no one will insure you for terrorist risk because of your business. Sort of has to happen. It expires on December 31. Defense authorization in Syria, I think we know about defense bills, just regular defense spending. Funding the Syrian rebels expires on December 11th. You would surely think they're going to do something on that. And then you got other things, the Ebola supplemental. You'll laugh, but you see satellite TV on here. Believe it or not, in rural areas, they don't have cable. So the only way they can get television is through like these dish network kind of things. But they make it cheap for them. They actually are allowed to violate copyright rules and get all the channels off, digitally off the from the air, I guess. And you can download them on rural areas, and they pay less for their TV because it costs so much to get it there in the first place. So that affects like 4 million people who will lose their TV. Now, I don't have to tell you what a big deal that is. And so, it seems joking, but I'm trying to give you a feel for the stuff they got to do. And then the last thing is multi-employer plans. That actually matters to this area. These are the types of plans that affect trucking companies, grocery store companies. I represent auto dealers and their mechanics in this. It represents all kind of people, and these are the plans that cover unionized workers. Construction trades, all these kind of things where you pay on an hourly rate basis into the plan. Guess what? All the rules to deal with their funding expires on like December 31st. So if you don't do something, you got real problems in these plans. Do I think they're going to do something? I think they're going to do a little itty-bitty patch, and we'll talk about that. But that's another thing. They may kick the ball down the road. So I just tried to give you a feel for what they got to do. I'm going to pass over that because I just, Wyden, he thought he was going to do things, but he's not. Let's talk about 2015. Because, again, if you're in lame duck and you're sitting there thinking, okay, what can I pass and what might I not pass, you're thinking, what would I have to do then in 2015 if I don't pass these things? Now, the big key that you should look at here is look through the dates on the left-hand side. They're all different months. They all come up at different times. Wow, isn't that really interesting? It wasn't an accident, okay? From the House side, they assumed they don't want to have these big mega bills where, the country's going to shut down unless we do things. So they now have decided, let's not make everything expire at the same date. Let's pick and choose the date. So they were smart last year when you thought they weren't doing anything. They actually were thinking about this. They actually started choosing dates when things would expire. And so instead of extending things to December 31, they didn't want to extend them right into the lame duck because they were worried, again, as I told you, who knows what gets done. So they started picking dates out in the early part of next year. So the doc fix. This is the reimbursement of doctors under Medicare. And if they don't get this fixed, physician payments under Medicare will go down anywhere from 25 to 30%. It's going to be a problem. And so they're going to fix that somehow. But that's got to get done by March. Then they're going to do a budget resolution in March. What is a budget resolution? A budget resolution is basically the blueprint for Congress. We haven't done very many recently because they haven't needed a blueprint. But they're going to likely pass a blueprint because now the House and the Senate are going to likely be in the same party. So they're likely to pass a budget resolution that sort of lays out the plan, the blueprint for Congress for the next year. And that's actually a big deal because the blueprint might also include something called reconciliation bills. Reconciliation bills, see, Ron said I know all this parliamentary procedure stuff. This is the stuff you see on C-SPAN. You just want to puke when you see it. But I used to have members, tell a story. I used to have members who I had to educate on this stuff who had been in the Senate for like 20 years. And they'd sit next to me and they'd hit me and go, now why is that guy doing that? And why is this guy doing this? And I'm thinking, you've already been here 20 years and you don't know? And so, but this doesn't always come up all the time. And so, members, I worked for a member once who said, his brain was like a bathtub. You fill it out and then fill it up, and then once it gets filled up, you got to let some stuff out to be able to fill it up again. So reconciliation, all you got to know about reconciliation is as follows. Reconciliation deals with spending and taxes. And if you have a bill that helps you meet your spending and tax items that are in your blueprint, your goals in your blueprint, in the Senate, you only need 51 votes to pass them. You don't need 60. Now think about what I just said. You've heard all the fighting that goes on in the Congress and about all the filibusters and stuff. Well, that's because the Democrats in the Senate weren't able to pass a budget over the last 6 years or so, or 4 years, because the House is controlled by Republicans and they wouldn't agree with them on anything. But if you have Congress, both House and Senate, together, they will pass a budget resolution and they'll include items for what's called reconciliation, basically making things reconcile, come together, add up. And they'll pass some bills that will be tax bills, health care bills, and some other bills. I don't even want to predict now, but there'll be several probably. And they'll be able to pass those with 51 votes. So think about that. If the Senate has, let's say, 52 Republicans next year, they could pass a bill with Republicans only. The health reform bill that we have in law right now, that passed as a reconciliation bill. See, you all wouldn't know that, but that was like a huge deal when they did that. But that passed with 51 votes also. So this will be the first chance Republicans get to use reconciliation. I've done reconciliation bills over the years multiple times, but there's all kind of rules. You don't even want to know. It makes your head hurt. But it's a way to get legislation passed. And the thought was, just to give you the background of it, the thought was, if it deals with spending in the budget, we want to be able to pass those bills because they may matter to the country. So let's not have them filibustered because they may be important. We may need to do something. Now, I have to be honest to say that was back in the day when we were probably passing only, 50 bills a year, and they were big bills. There was like Social Security Act and Medicare and stuff. And so reconciliation was important, really important. But that's what it's intended to do, and I look for that to come up. And so that's going to be a big deal as we move forward. Debt limit. We're going to have to extend the debt limit. Originally it was April. I'm thinking now it may slide a little bit till June. You see I have up there the CR, that's the continuing resolution. If they don't do a long-term one all the way to October or September 30, they could do one short-term and it could come up again in mid-year. You got a highway bill. All the funds in the Highway Trust Fund that build your roads and bridges, that goes bankrupt. So they aren't going to be able to contract for any more road work after May. And it's not it's not a small number. It's about $18 billion a year they need. Okay? And so depending on how, let's think about it. You build a road. You can't pass a highway bill that's a one-year highway bill. You got to plan roads. It takes years to build a road. And so that's $18 billion a year. The next question is, where do they get the money? And that'll be the big fight. So they got a highway bill they got to do. CHIP. This is the low-income children who get health insurance. So believe it or not, even though ACA was intended to cover everybody and everything, it doesn't always catch all the children because they knew CHIP was around. Well, CHIP expires. It's called Children Health Insurance Program. It expires in September. We got to do something on that with the CHIP program. And so they're going to do something on that. But, the problem is the last time they did the CHIP program, they paid for it with tobacco taxes. I don't know if I see that happening again this year. And I'm just laying out, you can see where the fights are. XM Bank. This is the bank that helps all small businesses and other people do exports overseas and stuff. There's a big controversy over the XM Bank right now. It's going to expire here during the lame duck, and they're going to extend it into March. But that's going to be a bill that comes up. And then you got trade bills. There's all kind of trade bills. They have at least 7 trade bills backed up with different countries that actually matter, and they haven't done anything on them. They need to do them by the summertime. And then you got reconciliation. Now, the reason why all these dates are this way is this. The Republicans thought, I don't want to negotiate on one big bill because that gives Obama too much leverage. So let's break it up into smaller bills so that if we argue about it and we can't agree, the country doesn't close up shop. So let's do all these in small bill increments. And they thought they'll have more leverage on Obama if you do a lot of small bills over a period of time. I love this because it means every month I got something to do. Now, also, because every one of these bills are going to be a vehicle that I could put something else on it I need to do. And let's talk about the leftovers from 2014 that come over here. I mentioned multi-employer pension plans. They're going to need to do something on that desperately. Central States Plan, which is the plan that's out of Chicago that covers a vast majority of Ohio, they need to do something, or that plan's going bankrupt in about 6 to 8 years. And when I say bankrupt, that means that workers, retirees right now who are maybe getting a pretty darn good pension, $50,000 a year because they were a construction trade worker or a long-term truck driver or something, they're getting maybe a $50,000 a year pension because they worked for 30 years, their pension will go down to $5,000 for a year. Think what that does to the economy here if you have 1 million unionized workers whose pension goes down that much. It's a big, big deal. Now, I talked to a member that's in the Midwest and asked, why aren't you doing more about this? I do these kind of things. Why aren't you doing more about this? It seems to me this would be a great issue for you. It's got a lot of your voters who care and stuff. And he was like, Rick, let me make it clear to you. If it's one thing, union members aren't going to vote for me generally. They just aren't going to vote for me. And I'm okay with that because I've won without their votes before. So I'm okay with them not voting. But if I try to do something to help them and I fail, it may tick them off. And then instead of voting against me, they're going to door knock. And they're going to go around and knock on doors and hand out flyers against me. And now that one vote becomes 5 or 10 votes against me. And so the thought was, I'm better off doing nothing and let somebody else try to fix it, because if I take the risk and fail, I've now put my race at jeopardy because now I got people actively working against me. Because let me tell you, if you lose your pension from $50,000 to $5,000, you're going to be pretty busy in the election. And so basically that's part of this inertia thing. You got to be willing to stick your neck out. It's a very difficult issue, pension plans. I represent car dealers, believe it or not, who their mechanics are in these plans. So let's say, I'll give you an example of a car dealer up in Minnesota. Has 30 mechanics, so pretty big car dealership, 30 mechanics in total. He found out recently he may owe $10 million to this trust if he tries to get out of it. His car dealership's not even slightly worth that. $10 million. So, he's just, and he never even knew it. He just paid the checks in every month, had no idea. But what happens is, in multi-employer plans, as companies go out, The companies that stay assume your liabilities. So as more and more trucking companies and other construction companies go out, the ones that stay in assume their liabilities. And so all at once, basically their liabilities are going up 20% a year. And so it's a big issue, and I've got a lot of members who are willing to help me on my auto dealers because many auto dealers are family-owned businesses. They want to pass the business on to their kids. They can't because no one's going to give their kid a $10 million liability. So that's going on. We'll talk tax extensions. We'll get that. Inversions. That's a good part to talk about inversions. Does anyone know what an inversion is? An inversion you've been reading about in the paper is these transactions where a large U.S. company buys a small foreign company, thus moves their headquarters overseas, but basically still controls the little small company. That's what it works. They're called an inversion transaction. I thought John Stewart had a nice line. I looked at it and I wrote it down here. He said, really, how I define an inversion, it's like it's an American company that was brought up as an American, but they know in their heart they're really Irish. And so that's sort of what goes on. And so, but I want to bring reality here. You all see this in the paper and think, again, why isn't Congress doing something on this? It seems so obvious that we could do something to stop these companies moving overseas. The first question is, why should we stop them? It's called worldwide commerce. But the second question is, why aren't they doing more? Well, there was a proposal in the last couple months to deny deductions for all overseas moving expenses. So any expenses related to moving a company overseas, you would lose your deductions. Okay? The problem is when the economists looked at it up in Congress, they found out that kind of proposal would have no impact on the number of jobs gained or lost in the U.S. That's first. Second, the proposal only raised $140 million over 10 years. And to put the $140 million in perspective, over that same 10 years, we would collect $4.5 trillion of corporate taxes. So $140 million is like nothing, small pocket change in Washington terms. And so that's not the solution, okay? And finding the solution is very difficult. And so I just, you see these things in the news and think, this is ridiculous. We should be stopped. But to try to stop this stuff, it's a way bigger problem than we're talking about. And so I just raised that. ACA reform, I hate to even talk about this. If Republicans take over the Senate, everyone thinks, and McConnell came out today saying, oh, I didn't say this. But the bottom line is, many people think they're going to try to repeal ACA. Bottom line is, that's not ever going to happen. It's over. It's not going to get repealed. You're going to have to just play around on the edges. Now, so they're going to have votes on repeal and stuff. They aren't going to go anywhere. Okay, it's just never happening. So then the question is, what do you do if you're a Republican Congress on ACA? And everyone agreed, Democrats and Republicans agree, things in ACA need change. One of the things they're looking very closely at is changing the minimum number of hours you have to work from 30 to 40 hours. So it's very likely that change would be made. But here's the problem. That's been estimated to cost $46 billion over 10 years. Okay, so $46 billion it would cost because so many people would not be covered by employer health insurance because now you've raised it from 30 to 40 hours. Who needs the coverage? So all those people will go in these exchanges, which means the government will start subsidizing all those people. So it costs So again, small changes that you would think seem like nothing matter, and $46 billion is a lot of money. The other thing they would try to fix, but it sort of guts ACA entirely, is going after the mandate. If you repeal the mandate requiring people to have health insurance, that changes the whole ballgame of how ACA works. But it actually raises money because the government will pay less subsidies out in these exchanges. So those are the kind of things that are going on. I got a couple of little things here, and I'm a few minutes behind. Tax reform. I'm so sick and tired of talking about tax reform. Do I think tax reform is going to happen with this president and this Congress? The answer is no. So let's start with that. Do I think a form of tax reform could happen, maybe international, maybe corporate, maybe some small items? Yes. But do I think individual reform is going to happen? I really don't see it. Now, one of the reasons is, one of the things you think you want to do reform is you need to simplify the code. It's way too complex. We need to simplify it, lower rates, yada, yada, yada. You can tell I'm sick of the subject. But Associated Press did a survey. How many people think their taxes, when they do their returns, it's complex? Well, you know what? 58% said it's easy to do our tax return. 58% said it's not a big deal. 66% of all Americans take a standard deduction. They don't even itemize. So I'm trying to bring you into, everybody else, because that's what you have to think of. And why is it easy? 40% of the people use software. 50% use paid preparers. So like 90-some% of the people don't do it by pen and paper or pencil and paper anymore. Now the problem is, and I'll tell a story on this, the IRS still administers the law like everyone's still using their pencils. And that's a real problem. And I'll give you an example. So everything they look at. So EITC, $30-40 billion a year in fraud. It's this program where if you work, the government will give you a check because we want to encourage you to work if you're low income. So it's actually started under Nixon, if you can imagine that. So, this program's been around a long time. It's gotten to be big checks now. They write $5,000-6,000 checks to these people. A lot of fraud, though, involved, because when that kind of money's involved, a lot of fraud goes on. So I do some work with H&R Block, and we went up and said, hey, I got some ideas how to fix this, and you need to ask questions that say X, Y, Z. They're like, we can't do that. That'll add a line on the form. I'm like, no one even knows what a form looks like until they print it out on their computer, No one looks at forms. Everything's done through diagnostics anymore. Oh, no, we can't add another line on a form. That's terrible. And it just blows my mind. And then going the next step, so I'm talking to a top Treasury official, top Treasury official about EITC stuff. And I said, I got to ask you, why are we cutting checks, like 30 and 40 checks, to a post office box? I don't know if you all saw the 60 Minutes report a couple months ago on this. I live this issue. Why do we cut checks to these people? And why do you cut 30 or 40 checks to the same address? Forget it's not a post office, or even better, why do you deposit 10 deposits to the same bank account? You can only file one tax return. And unless you got a big family who all work, I don't know why your checks would be going. So I asked, why aren't you doing something on that? It seems so simple, right? You put an identifier. If we send more than 10 checks to a bank account, bells go off. It's not that hard. And so, this is Rick being flippant in front of people. But this is top Treasury official, someone I know, so I could do that. And I said, why? And I got just as crazy an answer back. They said, Rick, there's a real reason why we got to let those checks go through. And I said, I paused a second and I said, please tell, And their comment was convents and communes. The convents and communes pool together a lot of money, and there's a good reason why they need to have multiple checks. And I'm like, you're kidding me, right? No, I didn't actually say that. I wanted to like that, but I didn't. But it's sort of like, really? And that was the reason they gave me, that they wouldn't want to put in that rule. Now, subsequent to that meeting, they did put in a rule saying they won't do more than I think 20 checks or 10 checks to the same bank account. But and then post office box, but not same address. But that was his answer, communes and convents. And I thought, man, does that tell you something more about our tax system? That they're worried about that? And we're losing $30 billion a year in fraud? It just blew my mind. But I'm just trying to we were talking about how it is working in Washington and whether it's frustrating or not. I'm giving you a little flavor of what I deal with. Partnerships, pass-throughs. I just want to mention, now they're really an individual tax item because it's a flow-through. But I do believe if we do some corporate tax reform, anything like corporate tax reform, it's likely they will go after what I call large partnerships. When I say large partnership, I mean if you have a partnership that has maybe gross revenue of $50 million or more, and that could be, don't forget, that could be something like 5 car dealerships together under one sub-S or a partnership form. The plan right now is if we do something like that on reform, they will tax that entity as a corporation. So they will not They will not treat you as a partnership and flow through any. They'll treat you like a corporation. I'm just throwing that out there. It's out there. You might see it in the Wall Street Journal in the next week or two. Tax reform, again, do I think it's going to happen? No. The big thing is number 2 there. Do we really want to eliminate tax expenditures? The whole thought is get rid of all these special tax breaks and we'll lower tax rates, right? That's the whole thought of tax reform. The problem is now the economists have come up, and we sort of knew this all along, but it wasn't a cool thing to say in town at the time. If you actually get rid of these expenditures, these special tax breaks, the economists now believe short-term investments in businesses will decline, which will lead to short-term job losses in this country. Now, I just told you, Politics 101, House members get elected every 2 years. Okay? So if we're just barely inching out of a recovery, do I really think we're going to do tax reform that could lead to short-term job losses? I don't see it. So that's what the economists are thinking now about all this stuff. So it's a problem. And also winners and losers. I'll just talk a second on winners and losers, which is any tax reform, I don't care what you do, has winners and losers. The White House recognized this early on. The whole reason why tax reform had issues is because the winners, and I think I said this last time I was here and it's still true today, the winners are financial services, i.e. Goldman Sachs, retail, and the service businesses. And so if you think about what America supposedly stands for, they fall over themselves to help manufacturers and everyone like that. They're net losers in tax reform. Well, you can't have a bill that manufacturers are net losers in and Goldman Sachs is a net winner. I can already tell you that ain't happening. And so that's a real problem. And why is that? Goldman Sachs doesn't have a lot of tax breaks. They just make a lot of money, doing all the paper profits and stuff. But they don't have depreciation. They don't have R&D tax. They don't have all that stuff. But manufacturers do. Same with service businesses. Their biggest expense is wages. Well, that's not a tax break, it's wages. And so they're big winners. If rates go down, they become big winners. Now, we can argue about whether rates need to go down in general because it's the right thing. But the bottom line is, from a political standpoint, you can't have those type of businesses be winners and people like manufacturers be losers. It just can't happen. Other things that go to tax reform real quick is, they took out a lot of sacred cows. Dave Camp and his bill and tax reform did. They went after taking away your dependent exemptions. They repealed state local taxes. They went after home mortgage. Why did they do all that? Well, he foolishly made a mistake. He said, I'm going to keep the distribution tables under tax reform the same as it is under current law. What that means is, based on income brackets, those people in those income brackets are going to pay the same gross amount of tax that they do under tax reform as they do under current law. Well, invariably, when you reduce rates, people who are wealthier are going to pay less. It's just a fact, okay? Because they pay more than 50% of all taxes. So, of course, if you lower rates, they're going to pay a little less. They're going to pay less, and people who are less fortunate are going to maybe have their rates reduced, but not to the same extent. It's just basic math. See, I do know numbers a little bit. And so it's just basic math. But here's the problem. When you try to do that, then you start structuring proposals based on how the distribution tables work, how the tables distributed amongst the income brackets, and you aren't thinking about what's real policy. And the problem is this. When we start looking at, I thought these were interesting statistics, so I wanted to throw them out here. If you try to tie to distribution tables, there's a fallacy in and of itself because you're trying to figure out ability to pay, who can pay their taxes, who can pay, share these burdens, basically. The problem is, if you look at the top 20% of the country, 73% of the entire country is in the top 20% for 1 year. So a lot of people's income goes up and down throughout. In the top 1%, 12% are in the top 1% for 1 year, but only 6% of Americans are in the top 1% all 10. So even at the high income brackets, they go up and down. And for the $1 million level, who earns over $1 million? 50% of the people in that bracket are only in it 1 year. Only 6% are in it for all 10 years. It's a pretty interesting fact. It tells you a lot about America that there are success stories, annually. And people go in and out of these things. But if you tie it into distribution tables, it just shows it's a problem. He went after charitable deductions for the same reason, because guess who gives gifts? People who are more fortunate, who earn more money. So he had to mess around with itemized deductions, and in his proposal, itemized deductions went down, itemizers went down from 1/3 of all taxpayers to 5%, because he wanted to go after high-income people. I'm not going to go into all this corporate stuff. We can talk about it if people want to come up afterwards. Revenue scoring, I want to get into that. But let's talk about one thing about scoring. You're going to hear in the next year something about dynamic scoring. Paul Ryan actually calls it reality-based scoring. And I know he was on campus here earlier. And the concept is, it's a way to, how do I want to explain this to you all? Have you all heard of the concept, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon? You know how you try to figure out what movie he was in and who was in that movie and who was in that movie? That's what dynamic scoring is. Dynamic scoring tries to not look at the normal thing like, okay, if I increase taxes on capital gains, I'm probably not going to sell my stocks right now. I'm going to wait. That's the first level. But the second level may be, well, I might not invest in a NASDAQ stock because that has more ups and downs. And the third level may be, well, those NASDAQ companies won't get enough investment, so they won't do enough R&D spending, and then you keep on going. That's what dynamic scoring does. So, but the Republicans believe it's the cure to all ills. That if we score these things right, everything works out fine. And so, I'm not a believer, can you tell? But Paul Ryan's really a believer in this. But one of the things that comes up all the time is, why do you always want to do it for tax and not spending? Because you would think if it's a great idea, you should do it for all bills, not just tax bills. And what is it? No one ever knows what it is. So I actually threw this in here. Now, this is from a 135-page document where Joint Tax tried to explain what dynamic scoring was in the Camp Bill. But I gave you some quotes here, more for edification later, but I thought this is the one that, it's also because it can reach easy. This talks about, okay, if we reduce marginal rates on labor, that means a portion of wages from additional work that a person keeps, he gets to keep, okay? Because, we're lowering the cost on labor. And that provides an incentive for people to work more, because they get to keep more the more they work. But as an economist, I used to run like 50 of these guys on joint tax. They look at it the other way too. But what offsets that is if you get to keep more, then you may want to work less because you get to keep more to begin with. And it's sort of like, you're just blowing my brains out here. And so, and frequently that's what happens, this dynamic scoring, you got things that are going both ways. But you can read through this later, but if anyone ever, when you hear about this in the news later and you want to know what dynamic scoring is, all you got to do is return to these two little charts, and I synopsized 135 pages into those three. Got a minute or two left to go, and then we're going to be done, and we're looking good. Tax extenders, I talked a lot about them, and these are they have to do something on them. And it's a bigger deal than you think from your investment standpoints, because if they don't do something on these by the end of the year, let me give you like GE is a good example. They probably book $1 billion in tax savings because of something in a tax extender, $1 billion. If they don't get this extended, they're going to have to run that through their financial statements and they get $1 billion of less benefit. So it's like a big deal. And so from an investment standpoint, if there's companies, R&D companies and other people, it's a big deal if these tax expenditures don't happen. Now, some people believe, and the accountants have said, maybe if you do them by first quarter in March, we won't make you book everything. But I don't believe that. But they're believing that. So there's a lot of pressure. Now, why can't they do this? How hard is it? We extend these things every year. The problem is the Senate said they were going to cut all these way back. Well, if you look, their bill cost $84 billion to extend these for 2 years. If they had done nothing, it would have cost $86 billion. So they didn't really cut anything back. And in fact, they added things. And let me give you a thought of what they added, because it's more humor of how Washington works. So there's a special deduction for films. So because they want to keep film making in this country, so there's a special accelerated deduction when you make films in this country. Okay? You can at least see that why they'd give a deduction. So Chuck Schumer decided, well, I want the same thing for Broadway theaters. Let's get the same deduction for Broadway theaters. But there's one problem. Films you could take and move to a foreign country. Broadway's sort of hard to move, you know? And so it's sort of like, really? And so they added stuff onto their bill, okay? And so the Senate cost, $84 billion. The House took a different approach. They didn't extend everything because they hate some of this stuff. But they extended some things they really like, R&D tax credit, some S-Corp stuff, everything else. But they wanted to make them permanent because they're sick and tired of doing these every year or two. But their bills cost $310 billion, okay, because they're making stuff permanent. Well, that's not going to happen either. So they somehow got to come together on a deal. Here's some of the deals, but I think a deal is they can't come to a deal. And so they do a one-year extension, and guess what? They fight about it next year. Is this a great country or what? Because I get paid every year for this. But no, it sounds way too cynical. But that's truly what's going to go on. I can see him punt this for a year. And so that's what's going on there. Let's see here. What else? I mentioned about other things that have to go on. I talked about these things. I think they're going to do something on the Internet Tax Freedom Act. Multi-employer plans, God knows. Highway bill, they're going to have to do something. I have no idea what they're going to do. You can see I'm full of nothing here. But my problem is, and I give speeches all around the country, and I was in San Francisco last week and Philly a couple days before that. The problem is I'm only as good as my material. And when you go up and talk to the chiefs of staff for Boehner and other people in the leadership, McConnell and stuff, they don't know either. So if they don't know, I can't know. And the bottom line is they don't know. So there's not a plan. There's not some big plan here that's nefarious and they've got something worked out and stuff. There's no plan. They're flying by the seat of their pants. And so that's really what's going on here. So what happens in the next year or two, even if Congress is taken over by Republicans, I have to be honest with you, I can't tell you. Because I don't know, because they don't know. And I mean, you would think they've already got a list coming put together and stuff. They have no list. They got nothing. And so that's sort of, the bottom line. So you can see why I almost don't want to give these speeches because it's so upbeat and uplifting. But for me, Tuesday is going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of races. We'll see if I'm right that it's a big wave, that 80% of the seats go one way or the other, Democrat or Republican. We'll know early. I know people out in the field doing a lot of stuff, and everything. And so it'll be interesting. And then, the following week or two, it'll be, okay, what's it mean? And even the commentators, on Tuesday night are going to tell you what it means. I'm going to tell you they don't know. They don't. And I know all these people. I work with George Stephanopoulos. I mean, they don't know. They're going to make it up. They talk to the same people I do. Okay, they talk to the exact same people I do, and I'm just telling you there isn't a plan yet on either side. I couldn't tell you what the Democrats want to do. There's no plan of, okay, if we lose, what are we going to do? They don't have one. Okay, so you're going to hear a lot of stuff on TV, and I'm just telling you they don't know. All right? That's it for now. We'll take questions. Go, Mark.
You told me you were going to be positive.
Yeah.
This year. When's that part coming up next?
That'll be for later. Yeah. No.
Good news.
Is there good news? I'm leaving out of here to go to Hilton Head today. Let's see. Good news. I don't know if I have any. I mean, I look at young members who are coming up. I mean, I'm probably too skeptical on all this stuff. But I look at young members, and you try to look at young members who you think are up and coming, and there's maybe a few. But no one jumps right out at me that's someone that's hot and young and I think could lead the country at some point. I just don't see it. There's a lot of good people who work up in the government, and so I know a lot of these people who are smart and everything, and they're no different than me, that, you're trying to do the right thing and everything. But I got to tell you, the very front of my speech about gridlock, everything I said there, you should magnify by 10, because truly that is what's going on. And one thing I can say to you in general about members, they're no different than all of us. It's no different than you are with your neighbors. It's personal. Everything's personal. And so, yeah, you're supposed to be thinking about bigger thoughts for the country and stuff, but when it all comes down to it, they're people and their personalities. And so when you don't get along with your neighbor, it's no different than not getting along with someone else on your committee and stuff. And they spend a lot of time together, and they get on each other's nerves. And so the stuff I told you about the gridlock, that is truly why we have the gridlock, is because the best example, can I take a second? The best example is I helped brief the Ways and Means Committee on depreciation, because they don't know anything about depreciation. So I had to meet with all the members, Democrats and Republicans. And so they named two, a Democrat and a Republican, to sort of set it all up and call me and ask me what I'm going to talk on, And I was talking to the Republican, and I was talking about him. I said, oh, the person you're going to be working with, very nice. She's really good. She's really interested. And she is. She's liberal, but she actually is interested in being helpful. And I said, I mentioned you should talk to her and stuff. He goes, I got to be honest with you. In the 2 years on the committee, I've never even said hello to her. And I'm like, you're kidding me. He goes, no, I've never even said hello to her. He goes, in fact, you may have to point her out to me when we come in the room so I don't mistake her for just a guest. And I'm like, really, But I mean, that's the kind of stuff that goes on there, and it's unfortunate, but it just is. And so that's why I say that gridlock stuff that I put it up there, and I could do 20 slides on that. I mean, I got more stuff on that to talk about, and I just didn't bother putting it up. But that is truly what's driving this. And so it's personal. Until we can get by the personal stuff and try to do it, it's very difficult. And that's why I don't have a lot of good news, because it's going to break through. And you know what? People like me always say, what we need, and this is going to sound really bad, we need a good crisis. Because if we had a crisis, for whatever reason, members come together and step up, and you actually see some members who would never think step up and really matter. And so a joke, macabre as it is on a Halloween, is that we need a good crisis or two. And if we have a good crisis or two, you might actually see people stand up and do something, because they're there. It's not like these people aren't willing to do it. It's the inertia of not doing anything. I gave you the story about the pension plan and stuff. So, other questions? Go.
How would you rate the leadership of the Senate and the House of Representatives, meaning the Speaker of the House?
Well,
because it seems like you've got a lack of vision other than starting from the top.
it does. Clearly it does. I will say, I'll speak for both Democrats and Republicans, because I think I can. I know them all. My partner used to be the chief tax person for the Clinton administration, and so, briefs all these people, and so we get a good flow for how this all works. How do I want to put it? They can only lead. Leadership comes from being followed. And so you can only lead if you have followers. If you're leading and there's no one behind you, it doesn't help you. And so the problem in the House is, especially when you're in the majority, not so much in the minority, because it's always easy to be opposed. Take it from someone who's in the minority at times too. But to be in the majority in the House, and it may help when they get a little more seats in this election, but when you only have 20 members who could swing a vote, these people, a lot of those people in the House, how do I want to put it? They would rather lose, this is Rick saying, so it's bad English, lose well than win poorly. Okay? So I'd rather lose and be true to my word versus win for the country, but do it where I compromise, because they view compromising as giving up on their values. And I can see that, so I can see both sides, but that is an opinion, and that's a problem. So John Boehner has I just told you on ACA. I am 100% clear we are not repealing ACA. 100% clear. But I'll guarantee you they're going to have votes on that in both the House and the Senate. And you saw Mitch McConnell today, if you go read your news stories, saying, oh yeah, I'm still for it, I'm for repeal. He's not. Okay, he's running an election, so he's got to say that, but he's not. Okay, he understands you aren't going to repeal it, and so those are those kind of things. So leading's very difficult. Harry Reid's got a difficult job too, because he was trying to keep his majority together. He only had a couple seat majority, and so that's difficult. So I don't know what to say about it other than I think the leadership is what it is. Do I think they need new leadership in general? Yeah, I think it would be helpful. But if you look at the people below them who would rise up, believe it or not, I think Chuck Schumer would be willing to cut some deals. but he's not always a profile in courage either. But I do think he would be willing to cut deals. I know him. I know his people. I think he would. But if you've seen him, he can't resist TV cameras, so that's always a problem. But McConnell, the person behind McConnell, is John Cornyn. I doubt if any of you know who he is. He's from Texas, and he's the number 2 person. And then after you get beyond that, then we get into much younger members who, that's a whole other thing. And Boehner, McCarthy, he's my age. He's actually younger than me. I mean, he was a staff person up there. And I think he's good, but I think he's a little young. I actually liked Eric Cantor. He lost, so what do I know? I actually liked Eric Cantor. I think Eric Cantor got it. But he lost. So I think it's way harder to lead than you think because it's like herding cats. It's very difficult. So, what else? All right.
Thank you.
Very good.
Always good. Thank you very much for your insight and your enthusiasm and the positive trends of what's happening in Washington. Again, we'll try to do this again next year. Hopefully, the climate is better. We're not moving the location. But anyways, appreciate your attendance and have a good weekend.